When we left off, you had just gotten hired onto Jake and the Fat Man. What made you take the job to start with, since you were not that fond of the show to begin with?
I had never worked on a network show before the live action, and my agent said it's a good move for you, the good people to work for. Probably the single most important to do so was working with the two producers on the show, David Mosinger and Jerry Taylor, who were married also at the time. Everyone said that they were like the best people in town to work for, and you could learn a lot from them. And the network actually didn't want to hire me on staff because I had no prior network credits in live action, and they fought against me. But Jerry and David fought to get me on the show, and the stories were nothing to write home about. They were perfunctory, they were fun, they were fine. But the best part was working with them. And I came about a third of the way into the season, so I was there for about 3/4 of a season, and they loved my work. The network loved my work. And end of the season, there was a conflict between David and the crew in Hawaii, where they began rewriting the showrunner's scripts to accommodate some of the actors. And David drew a line in the sand saying, "You can't do that. I'm the showrunner. After scripts leave here, they're locked. You can't go changing them." And they ignored that. And then David said, "Well, if this goes on, I have to go." And I told him, "If you go, I go." And he said, "I appreciate that," assuming it was just a gesture, but, don't worry about it. I said, "No, you understand. You brought me on. You fought for me. My loyalty is to you. If you go, I go." And they went, and I went. And my agent was furious. He said, "The CBS loves you. You have a great time. We've got to bring up the producer next year." And, it's not even an issue. There go, I go. Period. I did. CBS was very upset. And wandered in the wilderness again for a few months, doing other small things here and there. And then the phone rang one day. It was David, who said that he just gotten offered a gig as showrunner on Murder, She Wrote. And his first phone call was to me, which, again, shows how sometimes standing for the right thing counts. As those who stayed at Jake did not get that phone call. So he hired me onto that show, which had been a top 10 show for a long time and had recently fallen in the ratings, and they wanted to find a way to revive it. So David had the notion of bringing her to New York and changing their environments from Cabot Cove to something much more urban looking. I thought, well, let's, in addition to that, give her a teaching job at a local college, bring in more young people, and get her talking about writing. I love to talk about writing, and let's have her character talk about writing. Let's have her being more of a working writer. Let's show her hitting deadlines and missing deadlines and working all night, and that part of a writer's life, which Angela loved. And we brought the show back to where it needed to be in the ratings, and the network was very happy. And I was there for 2 years. And when end of the first season, we brought it back up to where it needed to be, and Angela asserted herself as executive producer and wanted to be in charge of the show, and David again drew a line in the sand. But before we did that, he said, "I know how you are. Don't make trouble. It's a good show. If I go, I want you to promise me you stay here this time, because I appreciated it once, but twice is ridiculous." And even though I wanted to go, he pressured me into staying, and I stayed for one season while they were doing that. And love writing for Angela. She's a good woman, talented woman, a woman of conscience. So that was a great experience to work on.
Was there a specific script that you loved writing on that show, or a storyline?
I know her favorite script that she confessed to me was the one called The Committee, which got deeply into the whole writing side of things, but also had a lot of really good performances and a lot of fun twists and turns in the storyline. There was one, I think it was called Final Curtain, which I made my last episode, which is appropriate, about a young writer who wants to be a playwright, so I was able to draw on a lot of that experience and background. When I left there was a number of reasons why it was complicated, but a couple of years afterward, they were trying to get a couple of Murder, She Wrote movies up off the ground for television, and they kept trying, and they couldn't make anything work with CBS. And they're having meetings and said, "What about Joe Straczynski, and they all kind of lay down for a while, and so we'll let's call them back up, and I did that for them, and then broke the curse, and they got that one produced, and they did 2 more beyond that.
That's great. Well, this was your first job as producer on Murder, She Wrote, is that right?
Yeah, my first job as producer, to a degree. I was still not involved with post-production or a lot of physical production. David tended to kind of keep that to himself to a large extent, which was in some ways a drawback for me then going on to the show I did after Murder, She Wrote, because I didn't understand the post process, I didn't understand the editing process. Casting I really wasn't much involved with, so I had some of the authority of a producer, but not where it counted. And that ended up biting me in the ass down the road.
Did you work day to day with Angela Lansbury as well?
Yeah, I worked with her day to day. I went to the office every day at Universal on the lot, and was there day in and day out. I got to the stage whenever I could, but I was there working with her day to day. Yeah.
Okay. Then why did you end up leaving after that year?
It's a personal matter. There was a conflict with a member of the group over there that was running the show, and personal things that were going on with this individual that I said I can't be party to, and left.
Did you have any idea what you'd do?
No. I think you can't say, well, I'm going to take a stand on something and then have it worked out. That's all going to be okay. Then I hit the parachute, then I just went. Whatever would happen next, happened next. To a degree, I was hoping that a project I had been working on for a while was going to go. We had done, after leaving Captain Power, I created a show called Babylon 5, which took 5 years for us to sell. It was in the midst of doing our second year that we got the pilot picked up for production. And we had no guarantee ever it was going to be a series. So when I left Murder, She Wrote, there was still that question in all of our minds. But that demonstrates the problem of not having a production background. So I came on to do Babylon 5. I really had no idea about production design or art direction or costume or wardrobe or post. So we shot the pilot for Babylon 5. I knew that there was a lot of it that didn't work for me. And when the director finished his cut, they brought me in to show me this is the cut and your turn. I'd never been in an editing room before. So I made a few small changes here and there and bollocksed it. It wasn't what it should have been. And I spent the next several years regretting it, which is why when we began the series of Babylon 5, I made a point to learn every single thing I could about every aspect of production, so that whether it was, I can run an Avid editing machine if I have to. I understand construction. I understand set design. I wanted to be the best producer that I could, which I didn't have those tools on Murder, She Wrote, but I gained them as I went to Babylon 5.
Okay. I'd like you to actually go very slowly through Babylon
Yeah.
5, step by step. And let's start right with the idea. How did it come to you?
Babylon 5 came from a number of areas all at the same time. Having been involved with various science fiction shows and network shows by this point, my sense was that about 30% of any television budget goes to waste from lack of preparation and forethought. I thought, number one, can the production model of television be done differently to make it more responsible and more responsive and more smart? So that was the production challenge. On the creative side, I was playing with 2 different notions at the same time. One was the idea of a big, huge, epic saga science fiction show, which would be massively expensive, showing empires rising and falling, interstellar war, and all that stuff, which I knew I could never sell. It was too expensive. The other one was the idea about a small space station, people trying to survive with each other and put up with each other in a small tin can. And then I realized one day in the shower that they were the same story. That you take this huge tapestry and you boil it down to the individual living on the space station like a UN kind of a thing. And it is that big story writ small. So you see the consequences on a personal level, on a individual level. So you can see the consequences of war, you see the consequences of diplomatic breakdowns. I'm fascinated by process. I wanted to see the process. How do you go from a place of peace to a place of war, and then afterward? How do civilizations rise and fall? In most science fiction shows, you start off with these are the bad guys, these are the good guys, and they never budge. They stay there for the entire run of the show. What if you flipped it? What if the guy you think is a bad guy at the beginning ends up being the good guy? What if the guy you think is a clown and a buffoon ends up being, a very important dark guy? And all that came together in that shower. Suddenly I saw this 5-year storyline unfurl in my head. I saw the entire thing end to end, top to bottom, front to back. And I staggered out of the shower, grabbing a notepad and a pen. Not the computers, not that stupid, and I was wet. And wrote down frantically as much as I could get down to that moment of the entire 5-year arc. And what's significant is that prior to that, no one had ever done a 5-year arc in American television. There were primetime soaps that went on forever, but they weren't designed to be built toward the conclusion. I wanted to do a story where it's 5 acts, 5 chapters built along the structure of a novel. Introduction, rising action, complication, climax, and denouement. Those are your 5 seasons. Never been done. But I thought if you're going to do your own show, you should do stuff that hasn't been done before, or what's the point? So I wrote the script, wrote the Bible for the show, and brought it to Doug Netter and John Copeland, with whom I had worked on Captain Power, because they were kind of at the cutting edge of technology at that time. And we went from place to place trying to sell this show for 5 years. And people thought it couldn't be done. Some said it shouldn't be done. We were told repeatedly that the market had room for one science fiction show that was Star Trek. Nothing else could be sold. And if you think about it, in the preceding 25 years, other than Star Trek, no American space-based science fiction show got more than 3 seasons in 25 years. So when we said we want to go for 5 years, they just laughed at us. Finally, Warner Brothers was putting together their own network, the Primetime Entertainment Network. And we were invited in to pitch to the executives. These were guys who came in from local TV stations around the country, guys for whom many polyesters had died for their suits, and didn't understand from story, but they were there at the Warner Brothers at the Burbank to hear what we had to pitch. We were there the first day. And all we had to show for it was me talking about the story and 30 seconds of CGI to show how the station was going to look. No one had ever done CGI for television like this before. It was going to be the first one. They always used models before us. And I was in the back room about to go on, pacing back and forth, nervous, and grinding my teeth, and I cracked a molar. And it cracked this way, all the way down. And saw colors that I'd never seen before. And Doug said, you can't go out like this. You're in no shape. You're in massive pain. If we come back in 4 days, they've heard 30 different pitches. They're going to be glazed over. This is our one chance. I'm not going to blow it now. Put some ice water in my mouth, held it there until the pain stopped. Took a while to get there, but they had rubber tongue, of course, afterward, and walked out. My name is Straczynski. This is my show. Yeah. For whatever reason, they went for it. And we did the pilot, which was a 2-hour story that set in place this 5-mile-long diplomatic outpost where representatives from different alien races were there.
Was that the Gathering?
That was the Gathering, and established the characters and this mystery of what happened during the war that had recently taken place, and set all the pieces in place for the show. And there's one bit of history that I'm chagrined about to this day. The makeup we had for Londo Mollari, who was the Centauri ambassador, was the drawings that would show this hair that kind of goes back like this in a slight rise. And when he was going into the makeup room with the headpiece on, which is very long so they can cut it to where they wanted to cut it to, he comes running to me and says, "Joe, this is great. Having it up here is terrific, and it's a huge, big fan of hair. Can we, keep it really big and long?" Well, I didn't know he was kidding. He was just having fun. I said, well, look, and I believed him. I said, well, look, if you're an actor and you think you can make this work, then I think you should go ahead and do it. And I left. Oh, crap. So we had this huge Centauri sunrise hair thing that we did, which we carried then for the next 5 years because of a practical joke on his part. But he had to then wear it for the next 5 years, so it worked out in the long run.
Yeah, it did work, though. So talk about how much of the show. So that piece of paper that you wrote those initial notes on, how much of it, by the end of it, was actually done? Did you do what you wanted to do?
At the end of the day, we got about 85% of what I wanted to do with that story. We had to compensate for losing some cast members, physical production things that came up. But yeah, we got to do most of it because once we got to pick up the series, which almost didn't happen because of Star Trek, after our episode 2 of year 2, we got no notes from Warner Brothers. They left us alone. It was benign neglect. They didn't promote us. They didn't help us. They didn't get in our way. So I got to write whatever I wanted to write. And that kind of creative freedom doesn't happen very often, so I got pretty much everything I wanted. But we almost didn't get there because after we shot the pilot, I got a call from Walter Koenig, who played Chekhov on Star Trek, who was having lunch with a guy at Paramount. He said, I want you to know they're doing a show based on a space station, diplomatic outpost, jump gate nearby, commander with a sort of a mystical history and destiny, and female second in command, and a changeling, which you have in your movie, and they're trying to subvert what you're doing and co-opt it, because at that time Warner's and Paramount were doing 2 different competing networks. And I figured, well, we can take what they're doing in Babylon 5 and co-opt it, we can sell it and kill their show. So they were actually telling stations, if you buy Babylon 5, you can't have Deep Space Nine. They tried to sink us wherever they possibly could. They're going to look like crap. They told people that our Babylon 5 is going to look cheap and terrible. They did everything they possibly could to stop us. It was trench warfare for a long time, and they almost sank our ship. But I think more pissed off than anything else, Warner decided to go ahead with it. But it was a pretty obvious riff on our show because, in fact, one of the cast members found Peter Jurasik, who played Londo on our show at a party, pulled him aside, said, I want you to know, all of us on DS9 know that our show came from your show, and on behalf of the cast, good luck. Which said a lot.
You never wanted to take it into any kind of legal battle?
I did. I wanted to sue their asses off. But Warner said, look, if we sue them, they'll countersue us. Both shows could be lost in litigation, and you'll never get your opportunity. So I bit the bullet and didn't take action because Warner's owned the show at that point. So we had to sort of sit back and watch them try and eat our lunch every week.
It was interesting because Majel Barrett Roddenberry actually appeared on an episode of Babylon 5. Was that intentional regarding what had happened?
Yeah, well, I know she wasn't happy with what they were doing either. And we reached out to Majel and said, we'd love to have you come on the show sometime as a show as a part of the Star Trek universe and the creators for what we're doing, as opposed to what they're doing over there. And she was happy to be part of that conversation. So yeah, she made an appearance on our show.
Wow. Now, how did you want to, I mean, in terms of the science fiction television that had come before it, how did you want to differentiate the world of Babylon 5 from some of that in terms of technology, in terms of the look?
Prior to B5, science fiction shows hit the reset button at the end of every episode, as if it never happened. I wanted the shows to cumulatively tell a much larger story. Really hadn't been done much before. I also wanted to show technology being done in a realistic fashion. So the ships were designed to move in space as you would actually move in space. So for the Star Furies is craft that have engines top, bottom, side to side, and underneath that can go forward and then spin around and fly backwards and fire forwards. And the person's in the center of it so that the inertial acceleration is compensated for. The station rotates to create gravity. It's not artificial gravity as we've seen before. In fact, after we've got the show on the air, I got a call from NASA to say, listen, we're looking for a design for a forklift to work with a space shuttle someday. And your design for the Star Fury is pretty close. Can we borrow it? And I said, sure, it's yours. So if you ever do it, just call them Star Furies, that's all. And that process is still being looked at. Apparently this year's down the road, but they're still keeping our design in mind. So we wanted it to be technically accurate. We wanted it to be innovative in a storytelling point of view. We wanted to create each season as a volume of a larger story. We wanted to use CGI, which really had not been done before in television. We wanted to shoot 16:9. which really was a new innovation at that time. Now everyone does it. So we were the first to do a lot of different things. And that, to me, again, is the whole point of doing it, is to break new ground, not fertilize old ground.
What about the universe itself, the world of Babylon 5?
In most science fiction shows, humans are at the top of the ladder. I wanted us to be closer toward the bottom. That there are races out there that are older and stronger and smarter than we are. And to, again, show the process of change so that we have two characters who are Londo and Jakar, who are from warring civilizations. One starts as the buffoon, one starts as a warrior, and they kind of change places after a while. And we see how that war goes and how it affects everyone in our show. We see Earth starting out in a fairly benign fashion until we see the president being assassinated, and then we see the vice president kind of coming up in what seems like a shady, larger organization, and using an attack on the government to pass laws abridging privacy and many different freedoms that seem very similar to the Patriot Act that came up later on. And I created a history of the B5 universe that goes about 1 million years the other direction in broad strokes and then closer to detail. So ultimately what it came down to was I created a future history and said, okay, let's take 5 years of that. The universe existed before that, the universe exists after that. But as you would do, say, a story of World War II starting right before Hitler's rise to chancellor to right before the end of the war, let's take that bite out of history. We refer to things that happened before, set up things that would happen afterward, but do like a history. And in fact, in the last episode, we reveal that this entire thing is a documentary made 150 years from now about what happened to the Babylon 5 station, funded by the Amla Shock, which is part of one of our organizations. That's our conceit. So again, it was stuff that never been done before.
What was the most difficult part of creating it?
Probably the most difficult part overall, well, it was a number of things. There was very little in the way of creative staff. The first 2 seasons, it was myself and my story editor, Larry DiTilio. And then after season 2, we parted ways. So in most shows, you have a staff of 6, 7 people working together to create the story. We didn't have that. It was me and Larry for the first 2 seasons and some freelancers who would come in. Meanwhile, I'm also doing a physical production on the show, so that from moment to moment, you're doing 5 shows simultaneously. You're writing one, prepping the next, shooting the next, editing the next, and posting and delivering the next. And you go from meeting to meeting all day long, shuttling from one to the other. And to keep all that straight in your head is a real challenge. So probably the sheer physicality of it was the most difficult part for me, because I would get to the stage around 10 o'clock, which is early for me, and no one's even wanted to see me for the first couple hours because I'm just not a pleasant person. And then being on set, production meetings, editing, go home, write for the whole evening, right where I can, where at the stage if I possibly can. I was sleeping about 2 or 3 hours a night, 5 days a week, and then crashing and dying on the weekends. And it became progressively more difficult to assign out stories because in my head I knew where it was all going, but it was getting harder and harder to explain it, particularly when in our 3rd year the stories became more cohesive. And it's hard to say to a freelancer, your episode starts here and it ends here. It all became a blur. So I wrote half the episodes in the first season, half the episodes in the second season, and then after Larry and I parted ways, I wrote the entire 3rd season of 22 episodes by myself, the 4th season entirely by myself, and all but one of the 5th season by myself. I wrote 91 out of 110 episodes, plus 5 TV movies based on the show. And what I didn't know at the time was that never been done before. I just, it made sense to me to do it, but apparently it was impossible. But no one told me it was impossible, so I just went ahead and did it. So that physical regimen of having to write all those episodes day in and day out, plus running the show more or less single-handedly and the creative side of things, that was hard. That was tough. It was the show damn near killed me.
I can see that. Did you have a first reader for those episodes that you wrote? I mean, how did once you turned it in, is it just automatically made? Were there any kind of discussions, or did you have to show it to anybody before the scripts went into production?
No, they left me alone. There were no first readers. I would write an episode, give it to my line producer, John Copeland, for distribution. But once it was written, we tended to shoot either our first or our second drafts because there wasn't much room for me to make much in the way of changes. The production changes, but not the story changes. No. No, we went as fast as we could. So I was writing when I was sick. I wrote 2 scripts when I was so sick with the flu that I had no memory of writing them afterward. They just appeared on my desk. Like the Elves had done it. Because you can't slow down. When you're working on a show, it's like getting in front of a train. And first you're pulling a train to get it to move, but then once it goes, you're running as fast as you can to stop being run over by the damn thing. So once we got going, we just never slowed down. And as showrunner, you're the first person on the deck and the last person to leave. And we were never sure year in and year out if we're going to get renewed or not. It was always a battle, always a struggle. But in amongst that was great joy because we assembled a terrific cast of characters and actors. The relationships with some of the characters were so strong, so dynamic, and the actors were so clever about how they approached the characters that it breathed new life into the words. There's a scene in one of the episodes where I want to turn the cliche on its head, where you have 2 characters stuck in a situation when they have to work together, or they're both going to die. We've seen that a lot. So I put Londo and Jakar, these 2 characters, into an elevator in the middle of a blaze going on around a big fire. And Londo says to him, and we have to work together or we're both going to die. And Jakar says, no. I realize if I do nothing at all, I get to watch you die. And yeah, I die too, but I'm totally okay with that. And it was written to be a very serious scene. And I was passing through the set when I heard the bell go off. I stopped, so making noise while they're shooting. And I hear Jakar's character laughing hysterically. I didn't write a funny scene for this. What's that all about? And bell goes off. I go over to the set where they were shooting in the elevator. And they were all very sheepish. We thought we'd play it like it was really funny, And so what do you let me say? And it was hysterically funny. So it's like this very serious scene and made it into a comic scene, which is just wonderful. And those kind of moments happened all the time on the show where the cast would just take what I had written and just elevate it to a whole different level.
And you're usually okay with that, or was there a way for the cast to give you notes or comments, anything like that, as you were going on?
The cast didn't give notes, and the word was that you didn't change a word of the script. Once it was finalized by me, no one was allowed to change anything unless they checked with me first. And that process was an actor has a question, usually a guest actor who doesn't understand the system, says, I have a question about this line, and then a walkie-talkie is, bring Joe down to the set, there's a question about the line, and they go up the ladder, and bring Joe down, and I come down, and it's like coming down from the mountain. And I would say no, and I go back to my office. So the cool part was what I wrote was what was shot, line for line, down to the ellipses. I put ellipses, they would pause, and again, for a writer, there's no greater thing to see your words being realized precisely. So that was a lot of fun. And
what about visually? How were you able to communicate what you wanted visually?
That came again from learning the different departments, so that you work with the wardrobe design. Okay, if this character comes from a desert planet, what kind of clothing would they wear? What kind of technology would they have? How would their sets look? How would their planet look? How would their architecture look? And you start to create this whole tapestry of things that, in a glance, tells you who this person is, where they come from. So the Centauri were based very much on a sort of a Napoleonic, overdone, very self-indulgent kind of look, and their climate and their world was very much the same way. Whereas other characters, came from a different point of view that was informed by their environment, by their history, their background. So it really was a matter of how do we sell with a glance who these characters are and what world they come from. So we really spent a lot of time working out the history of these characters and their planets and their worlds and their cultures and what art they liked, how their governments ran, their politics. Because all that stuff, whether you directly reference it or not, informs the character. And it can be a very important part of telling a story.
And how much did the actors know about what was coming for them?
I tried not to let the actors know too much ahead of time, because if you do, they begin playing the result rather than the process. So if the character knows he's starting off as a buffoon but is going to become the emperor down the road, that begins to affect how they pursue things. So I tried not to let them know. If they had to know for purposes of a scene, there was a flash forward or something, because we use foreshadowing devices that, again, we're not doing it on television at that time, I would tell them just enough to know what was going on, but no more than that. And there were moments when I played with the cast in ways that are probably inappropriate. I thought led them to believe they were going to be killed, and they really weren't, just to keep them on their toes. We were all very tight. It was a good operation in the sense that the cast and the crew hung out together. In making our new production model, we were under budget every year. We only had 110 episodes in 5 TV movies, 18 days of any serious overtime. Never had to force call in an actor. And they used to go on vacations together and hang out together. We went to conventions together, which is where things went terribly wrong. We were at a convention in Pasadena, and we were all going out to this audience of like 5,000 people. And preceding me were Andreas and Peter, who played Jakar and Lando. I didn't hear what they were saying. I was behind stage. And my introduction comes up. They play the video. I walk out on the stage, 5,000 people. Silence. Crickets. Nothing. Maybe they don't know it's me. I introduced myself. Nothing. Flop sweat. I'm not a social person, not a person who talks in front of an audience easily or lightly. And like 5 minutes goes by, not a peep. Finally, Andreas and Peter come bounding up the stairs. Say, we told the audience you were coming up not to applaud or laugh or to respond to any way to anything you did. So now it's okay to respond. And they did. They applauded the whole bit. And I said, you realize, of course, this means war. But revenge has to be done the right way. You got to wait. So they don't see it coming. So I let a month go by. Another month goes by. A third month goes by. Christmas party, I see Andreas Katsoulis. So are we good, you and I? That whole thing about the convention, old history, over and done with. I'm a dead man, aren't I? No, it's fine, trust me. 2 months more go by. Now I'm ready, because now they've forgotten. So I write a script in which Jakar's character is talking to someone and begins having this seizure and collapses and is brought into the med lab and is transforming into a female, because his species, when they're under great stress, sometimes can morph genders. Cut to Lando's quarters, and Jakar is there, seducing him, and playing by the same actor, of course, and says the line, you conquered my people, but you never conquered me. Go to bed. Later on, it's this whole long, terrible thing. And I put the script out, those scenes in there, to see what would happen, and begin the process of retribution. So, walk on the set. First thing, of course, I see is a member of the crew, female member of the crew, who says, I want to thank you for that script. I have friends who are transgenders. No one understands. And thank you. That's crap. Now I feel like an assassin. The script's circulating out there, and Jerry Doyle, who plays one of our actors, comes by the set after I got the script. Happened to be in the area, he said. We were shooting in an Orange Bang, near an Orange Bang factory. It was nothing in the area. There was no restaurants. There was nothing. He had to come there specifically to talk about the script. So happened to be in the area. And she says, great gag. He says, not a gag. We're going to shoot this. We're going to make this episode. There's like a Warner Brothers cartoon moment where he turns to dust and zips out. So it's getting further out. Peter Jurasik plays Lando. Shows up at the stage. Happened to be in the area. It's a great gag. He says, no, we're shooting it. Then I dropped the line that I've been holding on to for months. So I'm writing every episode of this show. I don't have time to write something we're not going to shoot. We're shooting this. Boop, gone. I play this out for a week. Up to the point where I say to the wardrobe people who take me very seriously, we need to design a dress for Andreas that he can wear, an appropriate sort of thing. Bring him in for a wardrobe fitting. I want to see options on breast size. I want to see the whole. I call prosthetics. Said we need to make appropriate prosthetics for this to work. Shave his chest. Do a full chest cast. I want to see options. Machinery begins working. And I torture Andreas and Peter with this for a week. Finally comes Friday, and I put out the script minus those scenes. And out comes the crew member I ran into before saying, I feel so betrayed. So now it's funny. Up to that moment, the cast were talking to each other on the phone saying he's lost his mind. We got to have an intervention. This is terrible. Now it's humorous. And finally, I see Andreas in the parking lot. I haven't seen him personally all week long. He comes up to me. He pulls out of his wallet a tiny newspaper clipping with my face on it saying 5 years or nothing. We're going to do this show. And he pulls his, I've been holding this for 3 years. I'm done with it now. You can have this. And walks away. And I have no idea what the hell that means. Which was, of course, the point. Him getting back at me one last time by doing something that I would never understand. But so that goes kind of pranks were, common on the show.
Wow. In terms of the CGI, how did that work in terms of getting it in time for the production?
Being the first show to use CGI, it was a very long, slow process of rendering things. It would take sometimes a minute per frame to render. You're talking about 2,000 frames per show, which is our average. That's a long time. And they were using Amigas back then, running Lightwave. So it was a long, slow, laborious process, particularly in our pilot and the first few episodes because Ron Thornton, who formed Foundation Imaging, had rabbits. And his render farm, while the computers, was in his apartment. So we have these Ethernet cables connecting 4 or 5 different computers, and the rabbits like to eat the cables. So he'd be rendering like a 10-hour render of a 10-second shot, and we'd have a rabbit crash. And he'd have to start over again because the rabbits ate the cables. Eventually they moved to different, better facilities than that. But we were kind of learning how this was done. We were the first show to use virtual sets, first show to do set extensions using CGI. We were sort of creating the language of CGI as we went, particularly rendering it, in a 16:9 structure. So the cool thing was seeing what the capacities were and were not. Prior to Space has been shown in a very black and white kind of a way. Look at the Star Trek universe. It was pretty much white ships and gray ships. We brought in color. We brought in actual nebula stuff from the telescopes, the Hubble, we used a lot. And we had these ridiculously huge battle sequences between hundreds of ships on either side, which you could never do before. But we were able to pull off. So I kept pushing it further to say, how far can I go with this? I said, just go as far as you want. As far as the story takes you, go. And we had tremendous freedom to do things that had been never even attempted before on television.
Is there anything that you wanted to do that you couldn't do?
No. Everything I wanted to do, we did. I mean, whether it was huge battle scenes or things that involve showing the internal dynamics of the station rotating and this one being caught in the middle of all this, there was nothing that I put down on paper we couldn't do. We didn't always do it as well as, we could do it now. But for its time, it was pretty freaking advanced.
Talk about the post-production as well. In terms of did you supervise all the editing?
I supervised the editing. I would, once the directors did their cuts, I went into the massage every episode and often restructure things. Every frame of film has my fingerprints on it. I was involved with sound design. I would spot the episodes, meaning I would sit down with Chris Franke, the composer, and say where music comes in and where music goes out, the kind of music that I wanted. And I was there for the final mixes because we were a very heavy action-oriented show sometimes, and you find that the action of the battle and the frequencies of the percussion were living in the same basic frequency range, so you have to sort of dial one or the other out. So I would throw it to percussion or I would throw it back to the sound effects. And I would stand in front of the big, huge room where we were doing the mix, like a composer indicating up and down and this and that. And probably if I could not be a writer, I'd be an editor, because that's the real fun of it to me, is making a story come together. So yeah, I was from script through prep, design, wardrobe, prosthetics, CGI, editing. I was there on every single part of this thing, end to end, top to bottom, front to back.
Wow. Talk about working with the directors themselves and how you communicated what you wanted with them.
Some directors are better than others. When you're dealing with an environment where your home base doesn't exist, it's all pixels. Sometimes some of them understood more than others how it was going to work. And there were some directors we had early on that just couldn't wrap their brains around, we had to move away from. But there's one director, Mike Vehar, who became our main guy, we had like an almost telepathic relationship. Whatever I put down, he got it immediately. And he could take it to another level, which was always a lot of fun to see. We often didn't understand it, what he was doing. At one point he brought in, there's a scene where Sheridan, our main character, is tackled and brought down in a bar fight. And he blew up a lot of lights and then brought in a still photographer to photograph the scene as he's being tackled down. And what the hell are you bringing a still photographer for? Just trust me, it's going to work. And did this whole stutter stop thing as the guy's taken down, where you see the flashes of the strobing of the still photography intercut with the regular film, and it just knocked us out, you know. And we always told the directors, go as far as you want. If you go too far, we'll pull you back. And I'm very easygoing. If you're doing it right, you won't hear from me. You won't hear from me if you're doing it wrong. So that gave the directors, who were often, you know, handicapped in television directing, which is very staid and very practical and pragmatic and almost dull, a chance to go as far as they could go visually. And some of them took that opportunity to just really explore the very edges of what you could do as a director in television. Others didn't know how to do that, and they ended up not working on the show very long.
Let's talk about the cast and casting them. I'm going to go through, I'll give you the names, and then we can go through one by one. Let's start with Michael O'Hara as Jeffrey Sinclair.
Michael had a real gravitas, a weight to him as a lead character that made him appealing instantly. He had a strength of personality and the command voice that I really responded to. So from day one, he was pretty much our preferred choice, my preferred choice, certainly.
Now, did you kind of picture him when you were writing it?
I never picture anyone when I'm writing, except for the character. And I wait for the actor to come in who is the character. The best example of that is, there's a character in the show, Veer Koto, who is the aide to Ambassador Malari, who was a very nervous, twitchy kind of guy, very insecure. And the day we were casting that part, Stephen first comes in, and we'd established by then the look of the Centauri, which is the hairpiece in the Centauri Sunrise. He hadn't been briefed. He didn't know. He walks in and sees all these guys with hair sticking up. And he thinks, oh, I should do something to match in with them. So he goes into the restroom, and he, you know, gets water and soap and starts trying to get his hair up where it should be, and can't get it right, and soap's dripping into his eyes, and, you know, it's a catastrophe. So they call him in, and he stands before us, and with this hair kind of going this way and that way, and says, I'm sorry, I didn't know, they didn't tell me about the hair thing, and I came out, they were wearing it, so I went in there, and I got soap in my eyes, and I can't see now, I can't read the pages. I looked over at my producer and said, it's fair. It's exactly who the character was, just who he was. So whenever someone walked into the room who was the character, we hired them on the spot.
That's great. Susan Ivanova, Claudia Christian. Ivanova, sorry.
Yeah. I like strong female characters, and I like strong, you know, Russian characters, because I come from that stock. And the problem with a lot of actresses is that they're either play love interests or ingenues. There aren't a lot of them who could handle action and being a strong command presence. And Claudia Christian had that strength of character. She had that real, I will kill you if you don't get out of my way attitude. So, again, that was an immediate choice of, yeah, she's got that strength, which a lot of them didn't have.
What about the character? What did you see the character as when you first envisioned her?
Again, coming from that whole doer Russian background. I wanted her to be the voice of doom and gloom at every possible opportunity. Like, whatever it is, we're all going to die. Let's just deal with it. You know? But who could also turn around and be really scary when she wanted to be. She has one speech where they're about to be attacked, and she's explaining to the person on the other end of the line, you know, I am the voice of vengeance. I am God's instrument. You know, I'm the last living thing you were ever going to see. God sent me, and then proceeds to kill everyone in sight. And she could deliver those lines really authentically. And so I wanted that, the power, but also the dark side of the Russian soul, which is kind of in me. In a way, all the characters are extensions of myself. That parts of me is in her. I like to think that I am as, you know, smart or wise as Jakar and Delenn, but I'm probably closer to Londo in terms of not being the best person in the world. But they're all kind of elements of myself that I put into those characters.
We didn't talk about the character of Jeffrey Sinclair. What were you envisioning with him?
Sinclair had a destiny ahead of him that was changed a bit after we parted ways at the end of the first season. I wanted a real mythic destiny for that character, which we ended up changing down the road a bit. So
initially, when you conceived of him, was he Valen in the beginning for you, in terms of the whole story?
No. He was meant to be there on the station for the entire run of the show. I'm going to be talking about this in about a week at a Babylon 5 20th anniversary reunion. So I will tell the story here. This has never been discussed anywhere until this moment. Into the first year of working with Michael, I began to notice problems. Good guy, good actor, but there were things happening that I couldn't account for behaviorally. And about halfway through, I asked him to come in, we talked, seemed fine, back to work. And end of the day, we talked to him again when he was more tired. And he began to manifest symptoms of psychosis, where he talked about looking for messages to him in the papers, that the FBI was following him, that he was getting secret messages in television programs. And I realized he was heading for a psychotic break. My psychology background came into play. And I didn't know what to do. Because when most of the time he was fine. But every so often under stress, out would come delusional behavior. What do I do? What do I do? My first show, first season, if I tell Warners about this, they'll pull the plug. I finally decided I'm going to tell Warners. I have to. I talked to Michael. I said, we need to get you. We don't have the power to force you to get medication, but I can stop this so you can get the care you need. He says, don't do it. Don't do it. I can't be responsible for the show shutting down, everyone losing their jobs. I can get through this. If you help me, I can get through this. And I said, if you really want a chance, I'll give you that chance. But we're going to assign someone to work with you and keep an eye on you. The moment the needle goes into the red, we're pulling the plug. Understand that? He said, I understand. I will work with you. We'll make this happen. And he held on by his fingernails for that season. I could see the strain it was taking on him, the toll it was taking, but he held on. And I was at any moment prepared to pull the trigger on this thing. We finished the season up, and I pulled him into the office. I said, you and I both know this is getting worse. You both know you're not going to make it to another season if things as they are. I'm going to move on from you as the commander of the station. Don't worry about it. Whatever your rent needs are for the while, I'll take care of it. Food, I got it covered. We will get you treatment. We will get you better. And I spent the next year or so working with him and to a degree with his family to get him the care that he needed while we brought on Sheridan to essay that role. And got him the proper meds. It was a long process of getting it worked out. In the next year, I said, can you come back to do a two-parter? We kept it secret because they wanted to kill his career. And got him to the point where he could now come back and do a two-parter to close off that arc and introduce the notion of him being Valen. And we finished the episode, and as we're sitting in the office, I said, we're going to keep working with you and make this better, and I'll keep the secret to my grave. He says, you don't have to. He says, look, keep it to my grave. Because if anything ever happens to me, I want people to know that this is a problem, and here's why I left. Because people need to know that there's a problem in their family. If this can happen to an actor, a star of a show, a commander of a station, it can happen to anyone, and it's not a scandalous thing. It can be dealt with. So if anything ever happens to me, I want you to be free to talk about this. I said, well, it's not going to happen. You've got to live all of us. So, yeah. And in the years that passed, he stayed on the meds. He got married. He had a kid. He started to get his acting career back together. For reasons unknown, he fell off the meds, and the fall was hard. We tried to keep in touch with him. He just disappeared off the grid and ended up in a halfway house under medication. And just this past year, passed away from a heart attack. And when I go to this convention in Phoenix in about a week and a half, I will be telling that story for the first time ever.
It's so tragic.
We've lost a number of cast members from the show, and that one was the most tragic because he fought so hard to make that work and to come back. And it's a terrible loss.
In terms of then you also having to write to accommodate that, how did it change your vision of the story?
I had to bring someone else in to pick up some of the threads we had for his character. Others I had to let go of. And that caused complications down the road where I had sort of transplant a few things, his relationship with a surveyor to Sheridan's ex-wife, who was an explorer. It caused a lot of complications, but I tried not to let the audience know that. I made it feel like, well, he's a military officer, he's been transferred to a different place, and we set up early on that we're going to pay this off somehow. So after like a 3 or 4 episode bump, people sort of signed on to it, and I was able to keep going in a straight line, but that falls into the 15-20% of things that didn't go quite according to plan.
And what would have happened, had he stayed on the whole time? How would that have changed that world, that ending?
Not something I want to get into.
Okay. Talk about Bruce Boxleitner as Sheridan.
Bruce was great. Bruce came on. He had that command voice, that presence. He was easygoing. He was immediately the captain not only of the station but also of the cast as well. Warners loved him. They were always looking to find different cast members to replace who we had because they wanted people with different names. So they said we're going to bring on someone else. They were really happy. He's like this golden retriever of a guy. He's just affable and everyone likes him and had that whole Western thing going on. He was politically just to the right of Attila the Hun. So those members who are our crew and cast who were on the left side, we had these huge arguments with him. One thing we did from the day one of the show to make this show different in terms of how we do things, on most shows when, for instance, there's a lunch break, the crew go to their trailers, the producers eat in their offices, the crew eat over here. I set a rule. Every day, everyone eats together in the tents behind the stage. I don't care if you're the star, you're sitting next to a grip, next to a carpenter, next to the sound guy, next to an extra. There's no hierarchy here. I'm there with you too every day in and day out. And it broke down all the walls of hierarchy, of stardom, and made it one cohesive unit day in and day out. And Bruce loved being part of that team out there. He liked the fact he was sitting next to a guy who was just a one-day extra, or sitting next to a guy who was a carpenter. And lines of communication were open that way that normally would be closed. So he was a joy to work with from day one onward.
And what about the character of Sheridan?
Sheridan is based largely as on Bruce. He's a very straightforward, if there's a problem here, let's just blow it up and move on kind of a guy, which is Bruce's approach to things as well. I tried wherever I could to borrow aspects of the actor's personalities to put it to the characters, because then it has a ring of truth to it. When I found out that Jerry Doyle, who played Garibaldi, was claustrophobic, I kept putting him in narrow spaces whenever I possibly could. Air ducts, tunnels, pipes, whatever it was, because even though it was open, he would get the screaming willies, which I wanted because you could see it on screen. So whatever I could possibly do so, I borrowed their attributes and showed them into the characters.
What about casting Jerry?
Casting Jerry was, again, I looked for the character to come in the door, and Garibaldi is a strong, arrogant character, and when Jerry came in, he was that person. I said, what role are you here for? I said, the role I want to get. Okay. And as I went over his resume, I saw Dance Theater of Harlem on it. Wait a minute. Dance Theater of Harlem? Dance, motherfucker. I want to see you dance. And of course he couldn't. It was a lie. Nobody ever caught him in it before. I love the fact he just lied blatantly throughout his resume. He didn't care. He just lied. And so that's the character. So we're bringing him on. Yeah.
Anything else you can say about Garibaldi?
No, he's the voice of the common man in many respects. He's not involved in the big, huge arcs and the big, huge conspiracies or the politics of it. He's just a security guy. He's a grunt. He's in the streets. And that helped to really ground the show, having someone like that who was just the voice of a beat cop, basically. And in any environment where you have, several 100,000 people living in a small tin can 5 miles long, there are going to be problems of someone throwing a punch, smuggling, whatever it happens to be. And I wanted to get those more grounded issues as well as large political ones as well, and having his character there allowed us to do that.
Okay. And what about his arc? Because he was there really through the whole 5 years. Was that pretty much what you had envisioned?
Yeah, his arc was a very important part of the show. And one thing the actor made the error of doing was saying that he was in every single episode up to a certain point in the show, so I wrote him out of the next episode, just to mess with him. Because you just don't see that to me. Yeah. And his hair was disappearing as we made the show, so we kind of had a thing where you can tell what season you're looking at, but seeing where his hairline is. But he didn't change that much over the course of the show. He pretty much stayed where he was until the very last season, where he became more involved in the larger storyline.
Yeah. Richard Biggs as Dr. Stephen Franklin.
Richard Biggs is another wonderful and tragic story. We hired him to play Dr. Franklin, and he said, is my ethnic background as a black man, an African American man, going to be part of the story? I said, no. We're past all that. No one gives a shit what gender you are, what relationships you have, what color you are. No one cares. So we will never mention it on this show once, ever. And we didn't. And he loved that part of it. He was just that character, And he became the character I would experiment with. I said I'm going to walk about, walking away from his life on the station and give him a drug addiction for a while, because a lot of doctors become addicted to their own drugs. Had him go undercover with a character named Marcus as a married couple, two guys. First time on television, you see them, two guys being a married couple in a TV show.
Did you get any flack for that, or?
No one noticed. I think in a show where you see aliens with strange appearances and extra appendages, what's a gay couple? That was our philosophy. That when you see someone coming at you with 3 heads and feathers, it makes the person next to you seem far less alien by comparison. Richard was almost entirely deaf. He had one ear he couldn't hear at all, one ear he could only hear a little bit. So he would learn not just his lines, but your lines, so that he would watch your lips and know when you finished talking that it was time for him to speak. And one of the nicest guys, fit, strong, and shortly after we finished production, maybe about less than a year later, he was at home taking a nap, got up, talked to his wife, I'm not feeling really well. We had to lay it back down again, passed away. There was a problem with his heart that he didn't know anything about. And this strong guy was just knocked down. The first one of our regular crew to pass away. But just a charming, wonderful guy. And his loss was felt by all of us.
Stop there to change the tape.
Yeah.